Hello, good evening and namaskar. I am Ajit Kumar Jha, the editor of the Public Global and the CEO of our Pixar. And today I wanted to focus on the deteriorating relationship between US and India and what is going to be the future of India's geopolitics, India's security policy. So let me start with this: the fall, the sort of tectonic shift in relationship between the U.S. and India. In fact, President Trump, he has done a tweet, and it's cryptically written. President Trump's tweet says, "We've lost India and Russia to the deepest, darkest China." This is an admission by US President Donald Trump that the relationship, the special strategic relationship between India and US, he kind of publicly admits that it has ended. So, and this tweet came on Friday, and this kind of, you know, predicts in a way, or portends rather, that's the better word, because with President Trump, you never know, things might change later. But the fact that this portends a tectonic shift in global alignments, and in this case, between the two largest democracies in the world, which have had very deep friendship from the year 1997. You know, so that is something. It sort of indicates that the U.S. is kind of pushing itself into what one calls an isolationist policy. Because remember, India was a strategic partner of the US, perhaps still is, because both US, India, Australia, and Japan are members of the Quad. And in fact, by the end of this year, the Quad is supposed to have a meeting. In fact, the meeting would have taken place in India. And the idea was that the Quad was built in such a way that it was to checkmate China. So the entire world saw India as the checkmate to China. Certainly the West did. Certainly US did, Europe did, Australia did, Japan did. So that might be about to change. Now, whether it will change or not, we have to watch out for. As I said, US President Donald Trump often changes his stance rather fast, and that causes a lot of uncertainty around various issues. But in this case, his open admission in a tweet when he says, looks like, and I'm quoting President Donald Trump, looks like we've lost India and Russia to deepest, darkest China. And then he adds, may they have a long and prosperous future together. Exclamation point. Thank you, President Trump, for sort of giving your blessings to a future prosperous relationship together. But obviously, President Trump doesn't mean it. The exclamation point and the way it has been said is obviously some kind of irony there. Uh, this has sent shockwaves across the world, even in the U.S. Strategic, experts did not anticipate such a stark and public admission of a geopolitical realignment. Because, and the interesting thing is, President Trump is not a person who would do this, uh, sort of make public admission of such a stark position. Remember, President Trump wrote the famous book, the art of the deal. And it is rare for him, rare for President Trump, if you go by his own book, Art of the Deal, to admit any loss. He never admits loss. When he argues, he always argues in such a way as if he's won. So this is publicly the first admission of a loss. The fact that these three BRIC nations are coming together. And not only he, following him, his his trade advisor, Mr. Navarro, Mr. Peter Navarro, he has in fact been much more caustic and cryptic, and he has said that we would like to say that this is unacceptable for us, and we reject it. He has called India the verb between the two consonants. In this case, Russia and China, I is a verb. So a verb between two consonants. And he has in the past accused India of, and I am quoting him, bankrolling Russia's war with Ukraine. Bankrolling, simply because India buys oil from Russia. India is certainly not in a position to bankroll any war. India is a poor country. Mr. Navarro knows that as well as anybody. We needed oil at lower prices, so we bought from Russia, number one. And it's not only an economic decision. Russia has been one of the longest ally of India, not from today, but from the time Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru became the prime minister. In the past, during the 1971 war with Pakistan, when Bangladesh was created, the US under President Nixon had threatened India by bringing a seventh fleet in the Bay of Bengal. Henry Kissinger was his advisor, and he did not like our late Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, so he used to threaten India. And at that time, it was Russia that had sided openly with India. And Russia has been the longest ally of India since the creation of this country, or even before that, because a lot of the nationalists were inspired by the Russian Revolution of that time, and they had very close relationship. So even someone like Subhash Chandra Bose was inspired by Russia in his fight, against British colonials. So were other leaders, Jawaharlal Nehru, almost the entire nationalist genre of leaders were inspired by Russia. And Russia has always been with developing countries, and that is an old relationship. Of course, we bought arms from them. We bought, Russia. We used to purchase highest number of arms from them, defense, equipment. At the same time, we would buy oil and other things. We've had a long sort of bilateral trade between the two countries for a while in rupee and ruble. So to make a statement like that by Mr. Navarro, who is otherwise a very erudite economist, he has been advising President Trump on his so-called this imposing of tariffs. To make a statement like that India is bankrolling Russia is, certainly very out of balance. And then he goes on to say that India is Kremlin's laundromat. I mean, look at the choice of words. Doesn't Mr. Navarro know that India has had a very close relationship with America? And to blame, this war was not started by India. In fact, someone could turn around and tell Mr. Navarro that this war was started by the NATO countries. They went and started, egging Ukraine on, getting into the national sovereignty of Russia, and Russia Russia got into the war with Ukraine. Where does India fit into all that? The fact that we have been buying oil, and the fact that we have been buying defense equipment from Russia is, as I said, right from our independence days. So to misinterpret that into this kind of language is uncalled for, certainly very undiplomatic. Uh, so uh, now the interesting question is, in a TV interview, Trump's social media post virtually jettisoned India as a US partner following this SEO summit in Tianjin. Um, the emergence of BRICS, ever since BRICS began, has always been an irritant for developed world. Majority of the people, by the way, live in BRIC countries, live in the so-called third world. And if you know the full meaning of BRICS, the BRICS almost began in the beginning of this millennia, and BRICS is basically Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now a number of developing countries in the world all around, from Africa, from Latin America, from other parts of the world, have applied for BRICS membership. It is not a military alliance like the NATO. NATO is a military alliance. So is the Quad in a way. In fact, some critics call Quad Asian NATO. So the BRICS is basically an economic alliance of countries which are tired of ex-colonial countries like Europe and America kind of setting the terms of the trade in the world. So it's basically a collection of emerging economies like India, China, Russia, as I said, Brazil, South Africa, and as I pointed out, there are literally dozens of applications for membership of the BRICS. And this is a continuous sort of fight, which I can go into in another video. But the basic fight is over the US dollar's dominance in terms of world trade. The BRIC countries have been arguing for alternative currency, a new currency if possible, which has not been possible until yet, but they have been arguing for it, or the currency used by these countries. For example, as I said, rupee ruble trade, right? Or China has been wanting to use its currency as an alternative currency. There are several proposals. There is no consensus yet, but China is certainly the strongest country in the BRICS, strongest in terms of, if the US is a $30 trillion economy, China is close to a $20 trillion economy, 19 trillion officially. If you go by purchasing power parity, even a bigger economy than the US. And China has been growing, for a long time, especially since that famous ping pong diplomacy, thanks to the US, by the way. These were US investments in China. It was American manufacturing that moved lock, stock, and barrel to China, because of which China grew. So in a way, whether it's the SCO, where Prime Minister Modi went and met both Mr. Putin and the Chinese president, both of that. Now, the point is, China is dominating that alliance, but it's not as if it's only China. It's all these other countries the US have been targeting. The US has targeted, in a way, the US has targeted India and Brazil much more than China. If you look at the tariff rates against both Brazil and India is 50%. Against China at one time, it was as high as what? 145%, I think. And then he came down. And today, the imposition on China is much lower than that of India, close to about 30%. So the thing is, President Trump, when he gave this tweet, he himself should point out that at one time, he considered Prime Minister Modi his friend. He used to consider Putin his friend. In fact, it was he who brought down the tariff rates with China with deal after deal from 145 to 30%. It is President Trump who at one time only started with a 25% tariff rate against India, arguing that Indian tariff rates have been very high. Yes, true, Indian tariff rates have been rather high, but that is because India has a very India has an agricultural sector where almost 65 to 70% of our population stays. They are very poor, and we have to protect the agricultural sector, the small scale industry, and President Trump knows that. So instead of going on a limbo on that issue, or for that matter, another issue which kind of became murky between India and the US, this whole India-Pakistan, 4-day war, if you want to call it, tussle between the two countries, which President Trump claims that he's the person who ended the war by using threat of tariffs. Whether he did or not is not the question. The question is that should not have been a reason to jettison a friendship which has built, as I said, almost from 1997, more than 25 years. From last 28 years, India and the US have been the greatest of strategic partners. In fact, our bilateral trade has been much more than 100 billion. Almost some estimates are as high as 130 to 140 billion. Of course, in that, India has a trade surplus close to 49 to 50 billion dollars. The US has a trade deficit. And of course, we are aware that President Trump does not like a trade deficit with any country. And therefore, initially, when he imposed the 50%, there has been long negotiations between the two countries. In fact, even at this moment when we are talking, the negotiations have been going on this issue of trade between the two countries for the last 4 months. Our Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal has been at it. So have several of the interlocutors in between. And we were supposed to have a serious level meeting by the end of this month. And as I said, by the end of this year, a serious Quad meeting. In fact, President Trump was supposed to come to India. If all this gets out of the agenda, if the entire thing is over, whether it's over or not, I am not speculating. All I'm saying is President Trump's tweet is very un-Trump-like if you go by his own book, The Art of the Deal. In fact, there is a sense of resignation in what President Trump has put out in his tweet. Usually President Trump writes in such a way or even speaks in such a way, it seems that he is about to carry on negotiations. He is known to be a transactional president who keeps changing the terms of the debate and keeps arguing for new deals. But this tweet sort of indicates, as I said, a very strong sense of resignation, and it is, unless he's using it for as a tactic for sarcasm, or he's using it as if he's putting pressure on India, which is probably unlikely of President Trump, but it is certainly, as I said, very un-Trump-like. And as I said, even among MAGA supporters, those who are with President Trump, quite a few of them are very surprised. And unfortunately, such an admission, public admission by President Trump, at least newspapers have reported, that it has increased antagonism against Indians, sort of what I would unleashing torrential racial abuse against Indians and slurs by the far right, by some of the MAGA members. And that is really, really something which is very un-American, like I would argue, and it borders strongly on racism. More than 1% of American population of, let's say, about 35 crores are actually the Indian diaspora. Many of them hold senior positions. In fact, in one of the recent meetings President Trump had with the big IT guys, yeah, just yesterday, where Bill Gates was present, in fact, where all the top honchos of the tech industries were present. Sundar Pichai was right sitting opposite President Trump. So senior IT professionals who live in the US, all of them are going to get affected if this kind of what I am calling racial antagonism and unleashing of racial abuse against Indians living in the US continues. That is really sort of the pits, and that should stop.